Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Relish the Journey. It's your podcast about the many different pathways of life and the stories that every person has to share. Really, this is the only podcast you ever have to listen to because we're not just in one niche, we're in all of them, interviewing all sorts of different people about anything and everything under the sun. Tonight, it could be day when you listen to this. Today, this episode is a really fun interview with Micha Goebig, and she's originally from Germany, so she's got a cool accent. She lives in Seattle, and we talked all about her company and her career as a life coach and the difference between a life coach and a therapist, the importance of abandoning distractions, of unlearning some things that we carry with us from childhood and how those things can cause us to seek out numbing influences in our life, and that when we can abandon those numbing influences, we can really achieve so much more. Her three words were path to self, as you'll see, and I really love her description about, sometimes you just have to go through instead of around. So I've given away enough already. Listen to it for yourself, but this is a great one, so enjoy. Well, first I have to start by just saying thank you. I know you're very busy. We were talking before we hit record about how digital things are going, which means I'm sure you're probably working more than ever because you can be everywhere all at once. So I appreciate you carving out some time to join us for the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And I just have to point out, I know I shared this anecdote with you before, like the first time we talked before we recorded here, but for those listening, right? Your last name is Goebig. My last name's Biggs. And I was sharing with you that a family saying of mine is go bigs or go home. And that's what made me, as soon as I saw your stuff, I was like, this is hilarious because I feel like it's meant to be, that it's that closeness in the last names is fun.
Totally. My Chicago relatives, they also use go big or go home.
There you go.
That's the family motto.
Yeah, and similarly, you named your company Goebig Coaching, and my company is Biggs Ideas. So we both played off of the last name there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Goebig Coaching? What is it that you do? What are you best known for?
Yeah. Actually, I want to say it took me years to come up with that name. You would think that it's pretty obvious.
Sure.
But it doesn't make sense in German, which is my first language. So that's why it took me a little longer. Yeah. So Goebig Coaching. I primarily work with female professionals, also with men, but primarily female professionals. And I help my clients unlearn what holds them back. So I think that's especially true for women. Nobody needs to tell young women that they need to work harder and learn more. I think what they all need at a certain point as they advance in their careers is to unlearn things. So I like to strip away all that, let me phrase it German way, propaganda of family and society and culture and all these good girl things that hold women back, like perfectionism. And a couple of other things, of course, are true for men as well. That's like imposter syndrome, self-sabotage. That is less of a gender-specific issue, and just leave those things behind so that people can tap their full potential and actually go big.
Sure. Love that. So how'd you find that little niche for yourself, right? How did you come across the idea of unlearning something? Is it something you had to experience first before you decided you want to help others do the same?
Yeah. Actually, that was a personal development that went first. So when I moved to the US, I first didn't coach. I did my coaching training in Germany, and that was all very much more business and executive coaching focused. And I came to the US, and my first thing was, I can't coach here. Why would people want to learn from me? So I was right in my own imposter syndrome and negative self-talk. And so I started self-coaching, which of course, coaches also have coaches, but at that point, I did a lot of work on myself, and at a certain point realized you can make a workshop out of that. And then at that point, I got myself out of this nobody wants to learn from me funk and went out with my workshop and realized then that there was a common theme with my own topics that resonated with people. And that was really the unlearning.
Yeah, it's interesting. And like you said, it was your own self-deprecating talk, right? That you had to unlearn that and then build yourself up to realize you could coach in the US.
Yeah, it's kind of, I'm generally a very confident person. And that also came with me when I moved here. But big changes just bring out new challenges, right? And I mean, they come with new challenges. And I surely didn't have the most difficult transition coming from Europe, having lived in the US before, having relatives here, having an American husband. So it was definitely easier than for many, many other people. But it's still a total change of scenery. And that's when your brain just like plays its first pranks. And gave me the opportunity to come up with new content and change direction in my coaching.
So what do you think is the most common thing that people have to unlearn? I saw on your website you've been in business for yourself for over 20 years. In that time, I'm sure you've seen a lot of the same things, right? So what are some of the most common unlearning that has to happen?
I think the main, if I want to say one thing, then it's the belief that we need to listen to our brains. The belief that whatever our brain produces and tells us in our thoughts is a fact, and we need to take it as it is. I think that's the most important lesson to unlearn, because that is all that stuff that we took in like a sponge when we were young, interpreted it as young kids do, and all the stuff we've learned, and that doesn't serve us. And it keeps us from changing our thoughts, helps us change our feelings and actions and results. So that's where we have to get started. And if we think that our brains are right and they deliver facts, then we don't have the best tool available to us in personal development.
So if we don't listen to the brain, what is it that we listen to?
Yeah. Well, we listen to all that. Oh, you're not good enough. You shouldn't have that. You've never done that. Why would you be able to do that? If I can do it, anybody else could. All these things, right?
Right.
That's everybody knows those things. And if we take that for granted and listen to that and don't change it, well, we get stuck. And our brain does that because it wants to keep us in our comfort zone, because obviously we have survived to this day. So that means comfort zone, that's safe.
Right.
And of course, that comfort zones are not as bad as we make them out to be sometimes, but they're not good for growth. They're good for rest, but they are not good for growth.
So if we're not listening to that self-talk that can be negative, who's in the driver's seat? Is that where we trust our gut over our brain, or what should we focus on then?
Yeah. So that's a good question, because a lot of people really, really have a hard time hearing intuition in the first place. So it's not even that they mistrust their gut. They just don't hear it because they are so used to all the negative chatter going on their mind. And if we manage to change the negative chatter, the self-talk, then it's also much easier to listen to body signals. It's kind of a hand-in-hand process, I would say. So I had to learn listening to my gut a lot more too. And there are a couple of studies that actually say that those gut decisions are better because you can know too much about a thing to make a good decision. That's pretty interesting.
That is interesting.
So decisions, yeah, it's interesting. I wish I knew the book title. But about spot decisions, yeah. So that's they are often better than the over-researched topics. I mean, of course, I'm not talking about science or academia. I'm talking about
Sure.
personal decisions, right? So, yeah, no. So not if it's about writing thesis, writing papers. So that is something where people have to relearn trusting their gut a little more. Just saying, okay, let's try it. What's the worst that can happen? That's risky.
Right. And like you said about being comfortable, that's not comfortable, right?
No.
That makes the brain a little upset because you're going against the survival instincts that are hardwired there.
Exactly. And I mean, the comfort zone is not very comfortable for many, many people, but it's safe. It's what we know. And so that makes it our comfort zone. And stepping out, I always tell my clients that they don't need to leave every time. I mean, you don't necessarily need to move to a foreign country or, quit your job or get married or divorced. Those big decisions. It doesn't always have to be those things. Often enough, it's just good to shuffle out of your comfort zone with little baby steps, and then the comfort zone grows right behind you.
Right. And then you start to look at the size of your discomfort zone and how smaller that's getting, and you try more things.
Exactly. And there are so many things where we can just really take a lot of baby steps. It's just another thing that holds us back is that we often try to think through what the best step would be, and then nothing happens.
Yeah,
instead of just taking a step.
Right, that's the analysis paralysis where you can know too much, to your point earlier, right? You get caught up in thinking about it and you're not actually doing it.
Yeah, it's basically like people waiting to apply to the perfect job, and then they have no practice applying just to some job. If someone has 10 job interviews, that person will probably really rock interview 11. And if you wait for that perfect job to apply to, you don't really have practice. And that's the same in our private life. If we wait for the perfect step, then there's a lot of time taken, and we might not even be good at it. If we just take steps and one step after another, not all of them might be good, but we build momentum.
So as a parent, I got a 2.5-year-old. This whole conversation of unlearning has me thinking a lot about learning. And ideally, we would raise our kids to not have to unlearn some of these bad habits, right? Have you explored that at all with people you work with? How do you make it so there's, you get it right the first time, I guess, right? You don't have to unlearn things. You just learn it the right way.
Yeah. Some things you can definitely learn the right way. But what will happen is that you cannot always be nice and friendly and explain everything to a small child. So there will be some tension, or the child sees some tension between the parents or another adult, maybe a kindergarten teacher gets upset. So there will always be something that in a kid starts that spiral of, if I want to avoid being criticized, or if I want to avoid someone being angry, I have to behave different. Because a small child just cannot see the difference between a serious incident and just a small rebuke. And so that the negative self-talk will happen, but it really depends to what extent.
Sure.
And I think that is something where, especially as a parent to a small child, it is so important to show kids and to say things that kids might not even understand at that age, that they can do whatever they want. Those things, those messages. Because now when I think back as an adult now, we all interpret the messages we get in our childhood. And if you can do whatever you want, you are worthy, you are capable, are messages you get a lot, you might not really know what to do with them when you are small. But they are extremely helpful as you grow older and meet a lot of people who have not gotten that message when they were young.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, I think some people don't say those things because they have no idea what I'm talking about, right? But
yeah.
The brain does, right? Or they understand the emotion behind what you're saying and the intent there, and then that's what registers. That's an interesting topic.
And I think it's a lot about self-worth and value, those things. And that's the energy children pick up. It's like when I was a kid, my father always joked a little that I could do whatever I want. I could become whatever I want, just not Pope or American president. And of course, as a kid, I had no idea why not Pope and why not American president. But everybody thought that was kind of a cute thing. for him to say, and I heard it a lot. And of course, it's like, okay, I can become whatever I want, and that's the message that sticks. And especially if people laugh a little, it has a positive connotation. So somehow, yeah, that's something that kids pick up the right way, and that helps the self-worth and self-esteem, and that outdoes the negative self-talk to a large extent. It's still there, but I think if you have that confidence or self-assurance there, then it's much easier to handle the self-doubt that you'll also have. But it's just much easier to say, okay, it's okay for me to be afraid of that. Everybody's afraid of things, and just do it anyway.
Right. Yeah, and like you say on your website, right? Done is better than perfect, right? Just do it anyway.
Yep.
Get it done.
Yep.
You can always improve on it, but you can't improve on something that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and lots of us tend to do that, right? So the half-finished website, the half-written novel, or even blog post, it stays somewhere in a file, and when it's not out there, it's not risky. But there's also no benefit to it. It has no worth, no value if
Sure.
it's not out there.
So this idea of you as a coach, I like to pick your brain on that because I do a lot of networking on social media with people and lining up podcast interviews. I've spoken to a lot of different types of people, some of whom offer coaching services. And it seems like anybody can just call themselves a coach, right? Now, you've had actual training to be a coach. What's your take on all that, right? About the idea of somebody as a coach and what is required for someone to sort of invoke that title?
So I actually benefit from the fact that there is no training requirement because I did my training in Germany. And so I did not have to go through the hassle of just like doing it again in the US or so. So I'm kind of benefiting from it, but I did have training. I personally think that some people might totally be able to be excellent coaches without having gone through a formal training. But I also think that a thing that's super valuable to learn is, for instance, when do I have to pass on a client to a therapist? That is because that's a really critical issue. When do I have to stop working with someone and say this requires a medical professional of some sort, a therapist? That is something I think is not automatically self-understood. And it depends. Some people, I think the industry is relatively new, or like as a bigger industry, it's relatively new. I could see that there will be a lot more requirements regarding that industry as it grows and becomes more and more established, because I still feel right now it's becoming very, very common among certain people, or like maybe in bigger cities, those things, but it's not super established yet. And in Europe, for instance, in Germany, life coach is really not that big of a deal yet. Business coaches, executive coaches, yeah, but life coaches, people don't know what it is compared to, let's say, a therapist.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I think it's a great point about knowing when someone needs, medical attention and that sort of training versus, here's some ways to find efficiency in your life and be more productive, not working through a mental health issue, right? There's a big difference there.
Right.
And that's a great point, one that I not thought of. So you just said something that's interesting, like knowing the difference. So is that how you'd explain the difference? Sort of my quick quip there of what's the difference between a life coach and a therapist?
Yeah, it's definitely, I am not messing with someone's mental health issues. So, and I also don't dig into the past. I like to look at the past because there's a lot of causal coaching you can do based on how we develop. The limiting beliefs we carry around, they come from the past. So it's good to look at those. But I think coaching in general is just more forward oriented. It uses what's happened before. It uses those stories, those memories to change them and to build a future that's not fully based on past experience, but choosing new thoughts, choosing new actions. And mental health issues may come up, but what I personally do is when someone tells me about trauma, that I ask them first if they have worked on that with a therapist.
Sure.
Because otherwise I tell people that I can't work with them at this point.
Right.
If the trauma is fresh and they have not seen a mental health professional about it, that's not something I can ethically do.
Yeah. Well, it makes a lot of sense. And by you weaving that in a conversation, it just makes it more acceptable, right? Because I think for a lot of people, it's not still to admit that they have a problem that would require that sort of care. The fact that you can confidently just say, oh yeah, you need to do that. Like, why wouldn't you have done that, right? That's again breaking down a self-limiting belief or some negative self-talk where they're unlearning that it's, only wimps get that kind of help or whatever we hear as kids, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of that around. And but I think the moment someone is looking into coaching, they have fortunately already taken the first step to exploring help that's out there in a broader sense, of course, because it's totally different to contact a coach than a therapist. I see it more like kind of like a personal trainer for the mind, or So it's just someone you have in your corner, and most people also don't spend an hour a week thinking about themselves, focusing on themselves, talking about themselves. That's a big luxury. And I also, the thing with the private trainer, I sometimes use that analogy because when I started weightlifting, tried out strength training and started to lift barbells, I did that in a couple of one-on-one sessions because I was already over 40 and I felt like, that's not something I want to do by myself or in a large group. And I did it for a while, and then I went to a group session, and then I went back to having private trainer lessons. And it was amazing what I could achieve just because that person was there and told me I could. So you could automatically lift heavier when someone is right there watching out for you and telling you, you can do that. And I think that's the same way. That's the same way with a coach. That people feel when they have a professional by their side in their corner who tells them, Chris, you can do it. Look at this. You've done a lot of great things already. They are much more willing to take the step, and then they can lift the metaphorical 20 pounds more.
Sure, yeah. Well, I love that analogy of the luxury of spending an hour on yourself, right? That for many of us, it is a luxury. We focus so much on other people that we're the last on our own to-do lists, right? That's another line that somebody gave me on this podcast, is to never put yourself last on your own to-do list. And I think what you just said supports that. And it is. I think part of it's that accountability, right? When you know there's a trainer waiting for you in the gym, you're not going to miss that workout. You've paid that person probably. You're going to show up because you made that commitment. And with coaching, business coach or life coach or whatever kind of coach someone's brought onto their team, it's that same sort of effect where, okay, now you are going to spend that time working on yourself because you have to. That person's there. No one likes to feel like they're letting somebody down.
Right.
So it's got that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and I like it too because it also works that way. It's like, okay, you can improve by working out by yourself. You can improve in large groups, but you will always make faster progress in small groups or with a one-on-one. And that is true of workouts, and that is true of whatever type of coaching or consulting you use too. Same thing. You can do it on your own, but it just takes you a lot longer. And there's the pitfalls are larger because there's no one who says, "Oh, let me correct your posture."
Right. Yeah, there's not that guy there that's done it before and can recognize a warning sign before you totally fall off the cliff.
Right, exactly.
So as you look back on your whole journey, because we've alluded to a lot, we've covered a lot more, moving from Germany to the States, everything you've learned in building up your coaching business and working for yourself, helping other people unlearn all these things, and undoubtedly you've learned things helping people unlearn, right? How would you summarize this entire journey of yours in just 3 words. And those 3 words can be a phrase, or they could be 3 individual words, but you have to pick 3.
All right. Now that I listen more to my gut feeling, the first thing that came to mind was path to self.
Past to self? Is that what you said?
Path to self.
Path to self. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And that was your gut?
That was what came up.
Yeah.
Yep. That was my gut, path to self. And I think that's actually pretty good because I feel that I've always been an authentic person, but I just become more and more me and myself with that journey as I grow older. And that's what I want for my clients too, of course.
Sure. So how, as it relates to you, what's been the path to yourself that has been unveiled through all the things that you've embarked upon?
I think the big points are that I have abandoned a lot of the distractions in my life or the numbing. That's something I've learned over the years that I hardly need any numbing anymore to look at the uncomfortable things. So if that's I don't know, alcohol or I don't know, binge watching, it doesn't really matter. So I hardly need any of these things anymore, or shopping, right? That was mine, partying and shopping. I don't need much of that anymore.
Those
because I can sit with it.
Yeah.
Yep. I can sit with it. I can look at the more unpleasant things more easily and say, yeah, that hurts, or oh, that sucks. But I know it's not lasting forever, so I might as well look at it that way. I go through. And through is always faster than around. Sure.
Yeah, to keep with our path analogy, right? The quickest path is a straight line, right? Not going around. You have to go through.
Yep. And that's not always the most pleasant, but quite honestly, the around just costs a lot of time. And in the end, you can't avoid the discomfort anyway.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Well, if other people are listening to this and they also like that and everything else you've been saying, where should we send them to find more of you and your programs and workshops and everything you have going on?
Yeah, I have a website, michagoebig.com or goebigcoaching.com. That leads people to the same site. And as far as social media goes, my main social media platform is Instagram. I spend way too much time on Instagram. So people can send me direct messages to go_big_coaching on Instagram or follow me there. And they can also find me on LinkedIn, Micha Goebig. I do have a Facebook profile and a company page, but I don't use it right now. I will be back when the next group coaching starts so that people have a way to communicate with each other. But I'm taking a Facebook break right now.
Sure. Can't blame me for that one. Sometimes you need a break.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And sometimes I'm especially good for taking a Facebook break, I think.
Well, I appreciate your time this evening. This has been a fun conversation for me. You make a lot of great points, and I know the listeners are going to learn more than one piece of wisdom here. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. That's a wrap for another episode of Relish the Journey. Thank you all so much for listening. And if you could be so kind to head on over to wherever you listen to this show, leave us a rating and a review, and hit that subscribe button. Helps us move up the charts. If you've seen us on social media, we've made a dent in South Africa. So South Africa, if you're listening, happy to be in the top 50 of entrepreneurship podcasts there, actually top 30. So by doing this, leaving the reviews and the ratings, you guys help me climb the charts, reach more people, spread this mantra of Relish the Journey. So thanks for listening to this episode. Please share it and do all the things. And we will be with you next time with another awesome guest. Cheers.